If you compare beer with bratwurst,
and cheese with wine,
or even whiskey,
with donuts,
then we think you can pair all of these delicious drinks with
murder,
conspiracies
missing persons,
and more.
Drink with us as you feed your craving for true crime and creepy stories.
Hello, I am Jason, and this is Catherine, also known as Katie. Katie, what kind of story and twisted tale do you have for us today?
Well, from May 1981 through December of 1982, women in Chicago were being hunted by a terrifying gang of men. These women were abducted right off the street, pulled into a red van, and taken to a dark temple erected to serve none other than Satan himself. And what happened to the women there would absolutely be an example of the criminal acts that would spur what the United States would come to call the Satanic Panic.
Oh, man. I love the Satanic Panic era. It's such a weird era because there was a lot of weird things that kind of coincided with it. Like there actually was a bit of satanic, I don't know, actions taking over a lot of crime and whatnot.
I grew
at the
up
time.
in a very small Baptist church, and I went to a lot of youth group meetings where we were talked to about Satanism in the 80s and the 90s.
Were you really?
Yes.
I didn't find out about it until adulthood. And I went to a Christian school and went to church twice in a week. And I guess a Baptist church is much different than probably most of them.
Yes, it was very different.
Fire, brimstone, and Satan.
And Satan.
Well, you said a lot of cool words there, including erect and Satan and panic. And, you know, I know of one drink that has cool, well, from what I know as a kid, a cool background.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure I'm remembering it right. Man, I might have to look that up. But anyway, good old drink called a Bloody Mary.
And I think you are talking about a game that kids were like afraid to play. And I legit remember maybe 5 years ago.
Is it Bloody Mary that you said? Okay,
Our
cool.
oldest daughter came home from school talking about how scared she was because of this game. And I was like, I'm going to show you it's not real. And then I showed her while almost peeing my pants out of fear.
Even as an adult.
Please don't let this be real. Please don't let this be real. And it wasn't. So, whew.
Oh, man. Well, I'm glad she didn't show up. I honestly have never done it because I was too scared. I'm not sure if I could do it now, just in case. Well, in our Bloody Marys are, I think it's one of the best drinks out there because you could have one right in the morning. And for some reason,
for all of you
makes
people
sense.
craving some alcohol first thing in the morning.
Well, if you're craving alcohol first thing in the morning, I don't suggest doing it because you have a problem. But, you know, when you I don't know, go to certain restaurants and certain holidays, brunch, there's nothing better than a Bloody Mary. In ours, we've got, we actually, you know, we cheat a little bit. We got a Bloody Mary mix. We got a picture on Instagram of what it is. It's really good.
It's really good.
We've had it before. McClure's, I think is what it's called. We got that. We got their pickle. But these things are great because you could put a salad in it, basically.
Yeah.
You could feel like you are getting a healthy meal out of a Bloody Mary. You could put bacon. You could put green olives, celery, pepperoncinis.
And it's not that difficult to make your own Bloody Mary mix with a base of tomato juice. Yeah. You need to add a little Worcestershire sauce, a variety of seasonings,
black pepper. And you can actually go pretty crazy with the seasonings too. Is that just a taste? If you want it,
add horseradish to these because I like them very, very spicy.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. An odd thing is if you want it really spicy, like go heavy on horseradish. which I would be like, no, go heavy on jalapenos or something. Nope. Horseradish will do the trick.
Oh, and
a lot of black
of
pepper
lime
too.
Juice.
Black pepper will give you a good spice. Yep, a squeeze of lime juice as well. We went pretty simple on ours because we only have so many things around.
People.
But cheers.
Cheers to Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary.
Bloody Mary. There's no Mary.
I know. No, there's no Mary, so we're fine. Yeah.
Oh, it's so good.
I dig Bloody Marys.
Why don't you describe what it tastes like? Obviously, we know you're not tasting it for the first time, but if somebody hasn't had a Bloody Mary, they might be interested.
No, my favorite kind of Bloody Mary mix is heavy on the celery salt, and I think you definitely, even in this pre-made mix, can taste the celery salt. The consistency is perfect. It's not super thick like you would think tomato juice is super thick, whether it's the vodka or even just the juices mixed in. It has a very liquid consistency. It just sounds disgusting.
I don't know if that's an actual description. And it's spicy,
which is really, really good.
Yeah.
Another thing you can do is add tequila and make it a Bloody Maria, which normally tequila is my siren song.
Have you ever had?
Yeah. And I don't like them at all.
Oh,
so it's very strange.
I've never had one.
I just think vodka complements the tomato juice much better.
Vodka complements everything. The Russians got it right with that. That's for sure. And
the Swedish.
Well,
go back and listen to episode 3, people.
I know. I don't think we ever said where it began, but it's got the vodka belt through Sweden, countries around it. But I don't know, but I always have assumed Russians created vodka. Either way, they've adopted it as their drink, and that's what I mean. They got it right.
Well, this is delicious. The spice just got me.
Your eyes are watering. You need me to talk for a second so you can compose yourself?
No, I think I've got it. So a drink called Bloody Mary is absolutely perfectly paired with a crime that is a poster crime for a period of time where the unexplained, the gruesome, was all chalked up to one entity, and that is Satan. So jumping in, as 1979 turned into 1980, societal culture in the United States was changing. As more women found themselves moving into the labor market, perhaps fueled by the growing women's rights movement or out of necessity due to an economic recession, children were increasingly requiring daycare. Now, quality daycare at this time was not always easy to find, resulting in a great amount of guilt that was felt by a society that was already struggling with a shift away from the nuclear family. Then a book was published. Michelle Remembers, written by a Canadian psychologist, chronicled a former patient's experiences as a child enduring horrific abuse at the hands of Satanists.
That was called Michelle Remembers?
I'm assuming Michelle is the patient.
No, yeah. I get it. I didn't mean to say that as a question. It was a question. I was just getting the name again because I've never heard of that book.
Michelle Remembers.
Very interested. Have you?
I've never read it.
No.
This best-selling book reminded the American public of a familiar villain, but painted this villain in a new light. A light that, when looking at a world where more children were being thrust into the hands of strangers for hours daily, would shine on a very, very, very scary possibility. A possibility that some would say was even panic-inducing. Now, what might have started out as an increased awareness regarding abuse on children, which most assuredly was taking place to some degree across the country, grew into a search to explain the cause of that abuse. And for many in a country struggling to find its new identity, the answer was simple. It must be Satan.
Of course.
It was easier to believe that this fallen angel from the Christian Bible, the one responsible for bringing sin into the world, was the cause of all of these atrocious acts, than to think that average human beings, People's friends, neighbors, even family members were capable of doing horrible things all on their own accord. That explanation seemed to take on a life of its own. Whenever a horrible crime was committed or a particularly strange crime took place, the immediate explanation was that it was committed at the hands of Satanists, perpetrated by secret cults, clad in crimson robes, pentagrams scratched into the skins of their members. Now, for the most part, that explanation, the one that Satanists were behind a multitude of crimes, was ludicrous. However, it was not always untrue. Sometimes at the heart of a crime or string of crimes, there was a satanic cult.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
As was the case in Chicago and surrounding suburbs starting in 1981. In May of that year, a 28-year-old single mom, Linda Sutton, would go missing while walking near Wrigley Field. A week later, when her body was discovered, it would be found in another less well-known field in Illinois called Villa Park. Her body had been brutalized. Most notably, her left breast had been removed. She had also been beaten and raped. Residents of Chicago were most assuredly shocked by the horrific details associated with Linda's abduction and murder. But as the following year passed, the city moved on without an answer as to what happened to Linda Sutton. Then, on May 15th, 1982, so just 2 weeks shy of a full year later, Lorraine Borowski would be abducted early one morning from out in front of the real estate office where she worked as a secretary. Her shoes, makeup, and keys, the keys she would have been using to open the office door, were left behind scattered on the sidewalk as an eerie telltale sign that whatever happened to Lorraine was not by her will. Her body would not be discovered for 5 months. When it was found, it had been discarded in a cemetery in Clarendon Hills, which is also a surrounding area of Chicago. Now, 2 weeks after Lorraine's abduction, 30-year-old Shuey Mack would go missing from Hanover Park. Her body was actually discovered before Lorraine's, as it would be found only 4 months after Shuey disappeared. But 2 weeks after Shuey Mack went missing, so before her body was found, a 19-year-old woman named Angel York would be abducted from off the street, just like the previous victims. She would be handcuffed while being held captive in a red van, and while inside this van, her perpetrators would slash both of her breasts. Now, what was different from the previous victims, Angel would be thrown from the moving van while still alive. Clearly, Angel went to work with investigators, trying to give them any information about who could have done this to her, but nothing came about the information she was able to give the police.
Did the police think it was related to the other 2 victims? Or
they haven't found their bodies
missing persons?
Yet. They haven't. I don't think they were automatically connecting them as of yet.
Okay.
Next, on August 28th, 1982, the body of abducted 18-year-old Sandra Delaware was discovered on the bank of the Chicago River. She had been stabbed, strangled, and just like our first victim, her left breast had been removed. Then, on September 8th, the body of 31-year-old Rose Davis was found in an alley located in a wealthy Chicago neighborhood. Her injuries were almost identical to that of Delaware's.
If it sounded like Katie laughed at all.
It's because face my husband is currently making.
Well, removing the left breast, it just was.
And I basically had to go into this thinking like, you're a doctor. Just say the things. Don't think about the things. Yeah. I've had days to prepare. My husband has not. So I audibly responded to the face he was making because the story is horrific. It's awful.
Yeah.
It's panic inducing.
Go on. I like it so far.
At the beginning of October 6th to be exact, the body of Beverly Johnson would be found located near some train tracks. She was severely beaten. Her left breast had been removed, and her right one was severely slashed, but she was still alive. The same day, a drug dealer named Rafael Tirado would be shot from a red van with a pistol and a rifle, and those gunshots would be fatal to Tirado. Now, Beverly's information was very helpful to law enforcement. The description of her attackers, as well as the red van where she was taken, led police to a man named Robin Gecht.
Okay.
Robin was a contractor and an electrician. He was divorced from a waitress, or maybe not divorced. The waitress's name was Rosemary, and the pair had 3 children together.
Why'd you say maybe not divorced?
Well, because every source I read said he was a married man. He was a married man. When he was arrested, he was a married man. And then I found this old newspaper article, so like a primary source from the Chicago Tribune, to get information about him. And it was like the most detailed information I got. And it said that she filed for divorce in 1980.
Oh. Well, filing isn't quite complete. He was a soon-to-be divorced man at the very least.
Yes.
Okay.
And when he was first brought in by police to answer questions, the officers didn't really have enough evidence to hold him or arrest him, so they were forced to let him go. But investigators were convinced that they had the man who was not only responsible for the attacks on their 7 known female victims and Tirado the drug dealer, but most likely for all of the 20 women who went missing over the course of the last year and a half.
There's 20 women that they were thinking is all connected to one person?
Yep.
Jeez.
Now, the staggering toll of 20 missing women included Carol Pappas, who was the wife of a Chicago Cubs player at the time, who had gone shopping one afternoon and was just never seen from again.
Wow.
So investigators continued to pursue Gecht as their main suspect. During their investigation, officers would uncover a previous hotel reservation for Robin Gecht and 3 other men. When they questioned the hotel owner about the men's time at his establishment, the owner would communicate that Gecht and the other men, quote, had held loud parties and appeared to be involved in some kind of cult, end quote. And apparently in like the 80s, that just didn't warrant anything other than mental note.
Yeah. Well,
they're partying like a cult.
The party scene was strong in the 80s. Yeah, you got cocaine, which that was
it's a weird time, I'm sure.
Popular thing to do was do cocaine and party it up.
Well, according to Gecht and his 3 homies, it was to rent a hotel room, throw a party, and act like you're in a cult. So information from the hotel stay would lead investigators to a 19-year-old man named Edward Spitzer and a pair of brothers named Thomas and Andrew Kokorales. It's Greek Orthodox. Kokorales.
Kokorales.
Whether you want to consider the 3 men's interrogations as a 3-sided version of the prisoner's dilemma or a criminal Mexican standoff, in the end, Thomas Kokorales would confess to a variety of attacks on women and implicate Robin Gecht as the leader. And the details of what happened to these women are legitimately horrifying. But to understand what happened to the victims, we have to step into the mind of a Satanist and understand Gecht a little bit better. Now, as a child, Gecht was one of 7 children and would be called the problem child. Specifically, Robin had trouble getting along with his mother. For a time, he had to be raised by his grandparents because having him in the home was just not an option. Now, when his grandparents died, he did return to his family's home, but that only lasted a short while. And at 16, he would move out. Out on his own, Gecht would live with various friends, and he seemed to make friends out of other, I'm going to use the language of this newspaper article, quote, slow kids, who like himself were high school dropouts. To me, the implication was that Gecht would choose individuals that had maybe a diminished cognitive capacity so he could easily manipulate them and take advantage of them.
Yeah. And if it happened at a young age, probably just easy to be the leader, like, the one they looked up to, give them this sense of power.
Well, and if he's a contractor and an electrician, he clearly has mental capabilities above what he's looking for in his friends. Now, at 19, Gecht would marry 16-year-old Rosemary. One characteristic that could, and I say could, it absolutely did, draw Robin Gecht's attention to young Rosemary was the size of her chest. Robin would say that being attracted to women with large breasts was a family trait going all the way back to his grandfather.
That's a weird statement. I bet that was said in the household.
He's a weird dude. Now, his fixation with that part of a woman would lead to some very disturbing sexual endeavors between him and his wife. And when I say between them, on behalf of him, I think is more appropriate. He would ask Rosemary to put long pins into her nipples and leave them there all day. Gecht found pleasure in the idea that his wife was experiencing stings of pain all day long. Now, these pins would cause infections in Rosemary's chest, and instead of simply stopping with the sadistic practice, Gecht simply furnished antibiotics for his wife, also the mother of his children.
What the heck?
Now, according to one newspaper, I've already discussed this somewhat, Rosemary filed for divorce from Gecht in 1980. She would cite, quote, inhumane treatment, unquote, and, quote, extreme mental cruelty, unquote, as the reasons why a divorce was warranted. But I'm doubtful that this divorce was ever finalized because all of the resources about Gecht's arrest would refer to him as a married man.
Was she a lot younger than him, or
3 years younger?
Okay, man. But I guess that is during a time where
she's a waitress. He's an electrician,
and it's a time where women are much more. I don't know. The man's in charge. It's a type of time. Is right. The man provides, and women fall in line.
We're going to talk about it in a little bit in terms of whether or not he cheated on his wife with other women to do this like pin exercise or whatever. And one resource I watched was like, she wasn't even mad. She would talk to these young girls, and I was like, yeah, she's just thankful that she's not the one having to deal with the garbage that this man was like expecting of these women. Now, nonetheless, this filing for divorce did not seem to stop Gecht from seeking satisfaction in terms of abuse and women's breasts. Gecht would be charged with the delinquency of a minor in connection with a sexual attack on a young girl sometime in 1980. In fact, this is what I wanted to reference. Before their divorce, it was reported that Gecht would cheat on his wife, she knew about it, by engaging in sexual acts with young girls. And these acts would include having the young girls stick these pins in their areolas.
When you say young girls, are they minors?
I think they're underage.
Jeez. What the fuck?
Yeah, he's a POS.
Yeah.
Now, in addition to his, and I'm going to say it in the most kind way I can, sexual eccentricities, Gecht was also a devout Satanist and would read written material about worshiping Satan constantly. This prolific consumption of Satanist material included reading a text about how you could use women's breasts as tobacco pouches.
What the fuck?
I've never read a Satanist material, but apparently this is what you get.
Tobacco pouches.
Yes.
So I'm trying to unfortunately picture how that works. So it's kind of a bag, a bowl.
I just feel like if you pick up a religious text and that's something it discusses, that's when you close the religious text and you're like, you know what? Let's try Buddhism.
Yeah.
Like, let's try something else because that doesn't seem okay.
Yeah.
But for Gecht, he was like, sign me up. That sounds great.
Well, what year was this?
So the crimes were committed from like 1981 through 1982.
So this is like late 70s that he's like probably getting into Satanism and stuff. I don't know what the Satan scene was, but it was definitely, I mean, it was prolific enough that a number of some of my favorite musicians, one in particular, Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin, collected Aleister Crowley stuff, which he was, I don't know if he actually considered himself a Satanist or what, but he's connected to Satanism, the early stages of it, because he was back in like beginning of 1900s. But then there was Timothy LaVey, who wrote a Satanic Bible. And yeah, Jimmy Page was obsessed with like collecting his stuff too, his writings, his works, and all sorts of stuff from that world. Now he claims he doesn't follow it, he just had an obsession with it.
Okay.
But
sure, Jimmy Page.
He's the guitarist for Led Zeppelin.
Sure.
One of the biggest bands in the world in the 70s. So I just imagine like there's got to be some interest in that anyway. And then you got the start of maybe the beginnings of what we had for 80s metal.
Yeah.
And 80s metal, Satan was tied into all of it. And most of it was like the media public perception of all these rock stars are Satanists and it's Satan's music. And so that's why I asked like what time it is, because where that influence could be. I suppose late 70s probably had some influence of that. I mean, Rosemary's Baby came out in the late 60s, and then you had a lot of the Omen, Satan movies coming out in the 70s. There's probably plenty of influence for him to not put that book down after reading about weird tobacco pouches.
I'm going to talk about another possible influence in Gecht's life, that if his Satanist material wasn't doing it for him, perhaps this other person would. So at some point, Gecht found himself working for none other than John Wayne Gacy.
Whoa.
As an employee of PDM Contractors.
No way.
And as we all know, John Wayne Gacy raped, tortured, and murdered 33 young men, many of whom he had acquired access to using this notion that they could potentially work for him.
Yeah, he killed plenty of his own employees or beginning employees, like a day or two. Oh, man, that's crazy.
Yes. Now,
but he ended up not being killed.
No. But it was shortly after I think John Wayne Gacy was arrested that he goes on this murdering extravaganza.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and I read some interesting things where people speculate that maybe he was an apprentice.
Yeah.
And then kind of morphed it to fit his own desires, but we're getting ahead of ourselves.
Okay.
So in pursuit of his Satan-worshiping faith, Gecht would turn his attic into a makeshift temple, complete with only being lit by candles, an altar in the center, and painted along the walls were inverted black and red crosses. Now, all Gecht was missing were individuals, impressionable young people he could recruit to join his Satan-worshiping cult. For this, Gecht would turn to his own employees, Edward Spitzer, who also, besides working for him, actually was a 19-year-old man who stayed with the Gechts in 1980. And then Gecht would also recruit two brothers, Thomas and Andrew, who both also worked for Gecht. Now, once Thomas Kokoralis was in custody, here is what he reported to investigators as to what happened to the women After they were spotted on the street and pulled into the red van, this red van that these 4 men used to prowl Chicago streets while hunting their women prey. The women were taken back to the makeshift Satanist temple, aka Geck's attic. They would be placed on the altar in the middle of the room, which was draped in a red sheet. While the 3 accomplices, Edward, Thomas, and Andrew, would rape, brutalize, torture, and sodomize the women, Gecht would read passages from the Satanist Bible.
So this is at his house?
Yes.
So wife's kind of aware
of
activity.
Or she's not living there anymore because she had filed for divorce.
Mm. And you didn't see anything about that?
No.
Dang, weird. This episode of the Perfectly Paired With podcast is brought to you by Jason Owen of the Impact Group. You'll be hard-pressed to find a better real estate agent than Jason Owen. If you live in the Denver metro area, be sure to contact him and ask him about the special savings you could receive as a first responder or a teacher. He is out there trying to help those that help us. Contact Jason Owen at the link in the description of this podcast and ask about those savings. That's Jason Owen of the Impact Group, a division of Your Castle Real Estate.
Now, the left breast would be removed using a wire garrote. Parts of these breasts would be served to the members of Gecht's satanic cult to be eaten raw as some twisted sacrament, and what was left would be masturbated in by Gecht and placed in a box. During Cocorales' confession, he would state that he saw at least 15 breasts in the box at one time.
Jeez. Okay. Well, that was a lot. Were the victims alive when this happened, or is it determined whether or not?
It isn't. So one of my resources said that these 4 men were involved in necromultimania, and when I looked it up, nobody could give me a definition.
Sounds like a gangbang on a dead body.
Bodies.
Yeah.
So I think while they were to be tortured, I think you have to be alive. Mm-hmm. But I would say a significant amount of what happened after the women were deceased.
The wire garrote to remove a breast is insanely disturbing, and I just can't help but pray that they weren't alive for that.
Yeah.
Because...
And to be very honest, I couldn't fixate on a lot of the details because it was so just like skin crawling uncomfortable. So I was like, read it, wrote it down, read it, wrote it down. Don't think about it at all. Because it's truly unimaginable.
Yeah, it is. And here's a...
And no wonder people were like, things like this are done by people who worship the devil. Like regular people, your neighbor, John,
humanity
isn't
can't
doing it.
Be capable of that. Yeah, I would almost think it would have to be done. Like a lot of this would have to be done after death. Otherwise, that's a very, very, very bloody mess everywhere, and much probably would have been found out a lot sooner because of the messes they left behind at hotels and his house, and a guest is over. It's like blood is dripping from your ceiling, it's coming from your attic. The other thing,
it's just a Bloody Mary.
So
Rosemary.
You said,
I just spilled my Bloody Mary.
Just drinking Bloody Marys in the attic.
My 3 best friends, these young idiots.
Yeah. Boy, Bloody Mary was a good choice on this one.
I know. I don't know if we'll ever be able to drink them the same.
Any of those victims named Mary?
No.
Good.
Well, I don't know because there are potentially 20 of them.
Right. And Mary was a popular name back then, so you could probably. The other thing I was going to ask about, which was going to make you very uncomfortable to answer. The masturbated part. What you said, what's left? How did you word that?
So parts of the breast would be cut off
Yeah.
and given to the Three Stooges, that they then would consume it raw, and then whatever is left of the breasts were masturbated into by Gecht and then placed in a box.
Oh, man. Yeah, that's probably we've gone over some dark details over the episodes we've done, and that might be
understatement of
that might be the worst
anything I've ever said. I think it's awful.
Yeah.
And that word isn't even sufficient.
Very understated.
There were parts of me when I was like looking into all of this, like why were some women actually taken back to the attic temple? Why were some women released? And I think it had to do with whoever was in the van that day. And I think that not all members of the cult were equal. Yeah. And I think some were probably more involved and more willing to take it to the end.
The ones released... like that lady thrown out.
Feet or...
Yeah. Like one of the members was like, "What the fuck are you guys doing?" And they're like, "Oh, we can't kill somebody in front of this person."
And this is an interesting thought. When one of the guys is sentenced, we're going to talk about what the judge says to him. But what I didn't include was the judge saying, "You tossed her out thinking she was dead. And you were just unlucky that she was actually alive." So I do think part of the enjoyment for these guys was a live victim. And if it appeared as though the victim died while in the van, I don't think it was fun or enjoyable. And so they could have potentially thrown her out because she didn't appeal to them anymore as like a sacrifice. And I'm sure there's something in the Bible, the Satanist Bible or whatever text that talk about what's an appropriate sacrifice for Satan.
Yeah. Well, I don't know much about the Satanist Bible.
Thank goodness. But it would freak me out.
I've definitely done a little reading on Timothy LaVey just because, and I love rock and roll.
So does Britney Spears.
God. She doesn't know what rock and roll is.
Crossroads.
I love music almost more than anything else. And so, a lot of these bands that I've come across, there's always like this peak of interest. And so I've looked into Timothy LaVey, and honestly, he even, I think in 1980, he was, interrogated or interviewed by the FBI or something about Timothy Kennedy, an assassination attempt on him or something. I can't remember exactly the details. Anyway, he was quoted saying to the FBI that his only interest in Satanism was a monetary value to him.
I was just going to say that I think rock bands during this time absolutely capitalized on the sexiness of like being connected to Satanism, and none of them had actually anything to do with Satanism.
Yeah.
And I would say that it was done really sort of in a way that made regular men, young people, think that their rock band idols were actually into it.
Yeah.
And then they started to pursue it. Whereas all these major bands they were doing it because it would get people interested in their music.
It got them more attention.
Yeah.
And we've had that. I've had that conversation with you before that.
None of them were coming out to squash rumors that if you play their album backwards, there's some secret message, because that means tons of people are going to go buy their albums and try to play them backwards.
Yep.
And that's money in their pocket.
Yep. And you don't want to squash that. So
let people think that you're into it.
Yep.
And then Gecht is going to get 3 little homeboys and they're going to create a gang. And they're going to rape and murder and brutalize women. So good job.
Collateral damage.
Now, this group of 4 men would be given the name the Ripper Crew as a nod to Jack the Ripper. When Robin Gecht was ultimately arrested after the confession of Coco Rallies, he would never, ever admit guilt. he stood adamant that the other 3 men simply used his red van to commit these terrible acts. In the end, all 4 men would be convicted of some of the crimes. Spitzer was sentenced to death for his role that he had in a variety of the attacks, but his death sentence was commuted to life without parole after the death penalty was abolished in Illinois.
Oh, wow.
Andrew Kokorales was also sentenced to death and would not have the same fortune as Spitzer. Andrew was executed by lethal injection in March of 1991. If I'm remembering correctly, he actually was the last person to be executed in Illinois.
Whoa.
Now, Andrew would decline a last meal prior to his execution, and his final statement included an apology to Borowski's family. That was one of the victims.
You've been using Gex.
Gecht is the leader.
Yeah, you've been using his last name. What's his first name?
Robin.
Robin. Oh, yeah, that's right.
So Andrew's final statement would include an apology to Borowski's family, and then he would go on to quote Bible passages. No, not passages from the Satanist Bible, but passages from Exodus and Proverbs in the Christian Bible. He also urged people to repent because the kingdom of heaven was at hand.
Oh, man. So Andrew apologized to one family.
Yes.
Do you know why just one?
I can tell you what I have inferred, and that is that Andrew is not the Kokorales brother who confessed. And so I think that both Andrew Kokorales and then Spitzer, why am I not remembering their names? Because they're hard names.
Yeah.
Spitzer were put on trial.
Is it Spitzer?
It's Spitzer. Have I said Spitzer
You
this
said
whole time?
Spitzer the whole
It's Spitzer.
I'm pretty sure we've had a Spitzer in another episode too. And I thought, wow, that's crazy.
And I think they were put on trial. And I think he's only taking responsibility for whichever one there was evidence that he actually participated in. Because if you look, and I didn't put all these details in here because I bet you can't even name a victim as we sit here. Like, they're not all convicted of all of the murders. Like, they're convicted
suspected
of these ones. He was convicted of these ones. And so I think he probably had evidence that he killed this woman. And so he's going to apologize to her family as opposed to, I'm sorry to this family and this family and this family.
Which is crazy because then he goes on to say, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is near. But he clearly is not repenting.
Religion is the opium for the masses or whatever. And I think, and I don't want to say simple, but simple minds look for something to cling to. And I think he clinged to Satanism when he had Gecht and probably in prison. Not a lot of Satanism going on. So he...
And there's definitely pastors and chapel.
And so he found identity in that. Whether it was true or not, it's not me to judge.
Yeah. Wow.
Now, because of Thomas's, so this is the other Kokorales brother, because of his confession and due to winning some appeals after being convicted to some of the crimes, he ultimately would be sentenced to 70 years with a possibility of parole. And he actually was released from prison in March of 2019.
This is one of the
Kokorales
brothers.
Yes.
So one of them got
released,
and then the other one got
executed.
Executed.
And Spitzer is currently in prison. We haven't talked about Gecht
Spitzer
yet.
was supposed to be executed,
but his sentence was commuted. And I find it somewhat ironic. Thomas, as of 2019, was living in like a Christian halfway house.
What?
So.
What?
Make of that what you will.
Wait, what's a Christian halfway house? What the hell is that?
It's a place where released prisoners can go. They're, I'm sure, offered free housing. They help them find work.
Get work. And,
That's an outreach.
And this is 2019?
2019.
Still hadn't figured it out yet.
I think he was quote unquote slow.
Slow. What was the quote? Slow people, or
Yeah.
slow?
So, we'll have to scroll up.
Yeah.
But they call them slow, which I don't think is an appropriate term
No,
these days.
it's not. And a paper wouldn't write that now. I think
at
that's what
all.
makes it funny is the paper surrounded himself with slow people or slow company or
High school dropouts like himself. Yeah.
basically called him slow too.
Yes. Now, Robin Gecht was never tried for any murders due to the lack of evidence. Now, I'm assuming this is referring to a lack of physical evidence because they did have the testimony provided by Thomas and the circumstantial evidence of the use of Gecht's van and attic.
Didn't they find left breasts in the attic?
I have no idea. I think those might have only been known because of the testimony provided.
Oh, so you didn't? Did the police find?
There was a lack of information regarding this. And I think, so 1980, I don't think people were into like following true crime. It wasn't a thing. Like you have to wait till we get into like O.J. Simpson for people to actually be interested in crimes. And it really was at the beginning of the Satanic Panic.
Right.
So I don't even think it drew that much attention.
Right.
There is a shocking lack of information. And I'm sure I could get trial records, but I did not.
Did you see anything about, like, did this maybe start what caused Satanic Panic?
See, I wouldn't even
Did
say...
the story ever even get that big? Because there had to have been something besides just,
I would say
kids
only
getting abused
retrospective. No. That is the psychology behind Satanic Panic.
Which I never knew
morphed.
that. I think
it turned into anything bad, we need to explain it because it's happening because Satan wants it to happen. I had no idea that that was the origination of the Satanic Panic. And I would say that this was only looked at like retrospectively as like, no, the Satanic Panic is real. Clearly there are cults. There's the Ripper Crew. And like, because it was so early, I don't think it was like a poster for, see, Satan is behind these terrible things.
Right. I'll say more after what happened with
Gecht.
Robin.
Yes, you girly name Robin. So in the end, he was convicted of attempted murder, aggravated kidnapping, deviant sexual assaults, and rape for the non-fatal rape and assault of Beverly Washington. She was the final victim that we know of found on the train tracks. It was her information that really spurred...
Did she recognize him?
I think it was a description of the van. And
It's just so strange that they could find these other guys.
No, they found him first. Remember?
No. But they could find these other guys guilty of actual murder. And they're the pawns to the whole thing. Or they're the helpers. But yet they can't find any. That just doesn't make a lot of sense.
Robin would say that he had nothing to do with it.
One confessed, right?
Yep.
Where the other ones stood trial and pled not guilty at the beginning, but just not even charge Robin with anything.
I'm assuming
as
they
far as
thought
murder.
they could get enough. It happens often, right? Like individuals are going to be charged with one crime, not all the crimes at the same time. So if they're found not guilty on the first one, like they have a second shot. So I think investigators were just like, we can get him on this. He will spend the rest of his life in jail.
So that
we're not even going to introduce all these other things unless we have to. Because as a juror, if you're going, okay, he definitely did this, but I don't think he did this. He didn't do this. He didn't do this. You can't prove to me that he did these other things. So maybe she's wrong.
Right.
And so by eliminating any other possible crime that the jury might go, I don't think he did that one. They were like, we don't need those.
Plus there's
we can get him. She will say he did it to her.
Right. And there's the double jeopardy. You can't retry a crime that's been found not guilty.
Correct.
And if further evidence is put forth on actual murders, then you've what do they call it in gambling? You blew your wad. That's what it's called.
That is not a phrase I understand.
I knew you wouldn't, and you would laugh. You dirty mind.
Yes, can't even make a joke at this point because this episode's so terrible. Now, I'm about ready to wrap up, so if you've got some last minute thoughts, I'm here to hear them.
My only thoughts is, outside of what I've said, it's a really strange story because, I mean, everything that you've told us makes sense to go to one guy, that this is what he was doing. But then there's, well, then why wasn't he like found out for all this and charged for all of this? And what makes my last question will be, what makes the sources that you've gone to, the people that want to retell this story, so confident that the Ripper crew, was that what it was?
Yes.
Ripper crew? That the Ripper crew did all these things, that maybe 21 women they did this to, and that there was,
I'm going to reference it in my outro, but I think it has a lot to do with the history of the 4 individuals. I think when you look at the previous acts and tendencies between Robin Gecht, Andrew and Thomas Kokeles, and Spreitzer, there's one individual who has shown the propensity for depraved acts against women. You combine that with the fact that where they were killed was in his attic. They were abducted with his van. He was more mature, more mentally competent, and that at a time where Chicago had just dealt with like John Wayne Gacy easily manipulating these young men to be comfortable with him enough that 33 of them are going to die at his hands. I think it's a big picture conclusion. And I think Robin Gecht was just smart enough to have these 3 men put themselves in a position where they look like the guilty ones, whereas it was all done for him. That's what I think.
Yeah. Oh, it makes sense. That's a lot of women. To not be charged with any of their murders. That's a new one. I haven't seen that. Like with literally serial killers.
Most of the resources didn't call them like the Ripper crew. They called them a collection of serial killers.
Yeah.
Which I went about it a different way because I think it's this collective, like mob mentality approach to brutalizing women. These 4 guys, it wasn't, they all independently were serial killers who were just like, serial killer? Same. Him too. And that guy. Like, let's go serial killers.
Yeah. Like who's going, who's got the kill tonight? Okay.
Yeah. So I think they all qualify as serial killers because they each have 3 different kills on 3 different occasions. Exactly. But I don't think they individually were serial killers. If
anybody's a serial killer in this group, a true psychopath capable of it, it's Robin.
Yes, and I equate him a ton to Charles Manson, even though Manson never, that we know of, physically was responsible for the death of another individual. And they would reference Manson, but not in a way like, these 2 guys are the same. It was, let's introduce you to Robin Gecht, the like mastermind behind a series of murders that will make Charles Manson look like a daycare worker. Like, yes, Charles Manson and his crew did really terrible things. This group one-upped it, and nobody really knows about them.
Yeah, and I thought of Charles Manson so many times during this whole thing.
It's all about branding.
Yeah, we're not talking about him, so I didn't bring him up. And no, I still, like,
No, Charles Manson is bad, but 20 plus women pulled from the streets, like daylight. One of the women was opening, so it's like what, 7, 8 in the morning, her real estate office. And they grab her and pull her into the vehicle. Like, that is ballsy.
No, I agree. Like, everything they did is awful, and the acts kind of, if it's that many, 20, that one-ups Manson. But I still think Manson, his ability to take women
and make women do the terrible things. That's still a
and
horse of a different color.
And him not even do any of it.
Yeah.
No, he's still the mastermind of. But what's weird is, like, we equate Manson to maybe Satanism a little bit, but it wasn't until he wasn't using Satanism in his cult. He used himself as a god. He was
the son of God.
Yeah, he was the god. But then it was until jail that the Satanism and stuff came out from him, and he was letting it out because, it's his ability to manipulate people is on a true.
I think those skills were superior to Gex because even in the end, all of his family still stood by him, and I think the Ripper crew probably jumped ship real quick. Like, their allegiance to Gecht was not as solid as Manson's followers.
I'm not saying what he did wasn't on a truly evil scale. It's probably as evil as you get next to somebody like Charles Manson. But he certainly seems to be the lead on everything, hands-on. And I would call him a serial killer over the others. The others were stooges.
Yeah,
the three stooges. So do your outro here.
Well, the reign of the Ripper crew was not long, but it was terrifying and it was deadly. If we are to believe what has been argued by and on behalf of Edward Spitzer, Andrew Kokorales, and Thomas Kokorales, they, like Gecht's teenage friends, were simply taken in and manipulated by the depraved Robin Gecht. According to the three accomplices, Gecht used them to help put into place these atrocious acts committed on innocent women to appease Gecht's sick sexual desires that he simply justified using his satanic beliefs. I am not undermining the culpability of the three younger men, but before being arrested, there was little to indicate. There were almost no signs that these three men were capable of kidnapping, rape, torture, necrophilia, and cannibalism. During Gecht's sentencing, he would receive a prison term of 120 years. Judge Mahone would summarize Gecht's actions by saying, quote, "Only a devil would do these things. An animal would not do these things. A monster would."